Why does it seem that the most ignorant speak with more confidence, while the wise hesitate over every word? This question silently haunts us as we look around, at work, on social media, in politics, even in trivial conversations. There's always someone who, with unshakable conviction, explains the world in short, confident, definitive sentences. And alongside this firm voice stands the silent thinker, who stutters, who gets lost in nuances, who prefers the weight of doubt to the lightness of certainty. This contrast disturbs us because it exposes one of the deepest ironies of the human condition. Those who understand the world least are often those who believe they most dominate it. And those who truly study, reflect, and question seem eternally insecure, almost fragile in the face of life's complexity. Is ignorance fertile ground for self-confidence? Does true knowledge weaken us, making us more aware of our smallness in the face of infinity? This paradox, of convinced fools and hesitant sages, is not just a subjective impression. It has a name, a study, and scientific proof. It's called Dunning-Kruger effect. But before we dive in, I want you to think about your own life. How many times have you remained silent in a discussion because you felt you didn't know enough, while another, far less informed, spoke as if they knew the truth? How many times was your hesitation interpreted as weakness, while the other's arrogance was mistaken for wisdom? The truth is that the modern world rewards conviction, not depth. We're trained to listen to those who speak loudest, not those who think deepest. And that's why the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just a psychological phenomenon, it's a cruel mirror of our society. The confidence of the ignorant is not new. The ancients were already suspicious of it. Socrates, over 2,000 years ago, stated, "I only know that I know nothing." His phrase resonates to this day because it carries the same perception. The deeper you delve into knowledge, the more you realize that the universe is too vast to fit into easy answers. And yet, here we are, in a world where the most insecure remain silent, and the most convinced dominate the digital and television stages, and even positions of power. It's a perverse inversion that shapes our relationships, our choices, and even the collective future of humanity. In this video, we'll walk together through this contradiction. We'll understand the scientific origins of the Dunning-Kruger effect, reflect on its philosophical roots, and see how it shapes the culture of superficiality in which we live. But more than that, we'll try to understand what this paradox teaches us about the human condition itself, about ourselves who oscillate between the arrogance of ignorance and the painful humility of overthinking. And perhaps, in the end, you will realize that wisdom is not a collection of certainties, but a constant exercise in humility. If this video made you stop for a few seconds, maybe it's because a part of you needed to hear it. And if you want to help bring this kind of content to more people, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This will allow this community to continue growing and allow me to produce more videos like this. Sometimes, great discoveries in psychology are born from an uncomfortable observation, that human beings do not see themselves as they really are. This is precisely what led two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, to study a curious phenomenon in the late 1990s. They noticed that many people had a strange tendency. Those who knew little about a given topic not only made more mistakes, but were also unable to realize how wrong they were. It was as if ignorance came with a double burden, that of not knowing, and that of not knowing that one doesn't know. This perception gained strength when Dunning came across a real, almost tragicomic case that became the perfect symbol of this effect. The case of MacArthur Wheeler, a man who, in 1995, attempted to rob two banks in Pittsburgh in an unusual way. Wheeler believed that rubbing lemon juice on his face would make him invisible to security cameras. He wasn't crazy, nor was he on drugs. He genuinely believed that because lemon juice could be used as invisible ink on paper, it would also act as an invisibility cloak against lenses and sensors. He was arrested a few hours later, completely surprised that his foolproof technique had failed. This episode caught Dunning's attention, and he asked himself, how can someone be so wrong and yet so confident? Together with Kruger, he conducted a series of experiments. They asked people to take tests on logic, grammar, and humor, and then rate their own performance. The results were revealing. The participants who performed worst were precisely those who most overestimated their competence. They believed they were among the best when in fact they were at the bottom of the scale. Meanwhile, the most competent, those who truly excelled, often underestimated their own abilities. To them, what was simple seemed obvious to everyone. Intelligence, in its most genuine form, was accompanied by a sense of inadequacy. This study gave rise to what we now call Dunning-Kruger effect. The human tendency to misjudge one's own competence, to believe one knows more than one actually does, especially when knowledge is limited. It's a universal effect that doesn't discriminate against age, social class, or profession. It affects all of us in different areas of life. You can be an expert in one field and, at the same time, a victim of this bias in another. Because the human mind wasn't designed to cope well with its own ignorance. This discovery not only confirmed what many have intuited throughout history, that self-confidence devoid of wisdom is a danger, but also gave a scientific outline to the paradox that philosophers such as Socrates, Pascal, and Montaigne had already denounced. The less we know, the more we think we know. The more we know, the more we realize how much we ignore. The most disturbing thing is that, contrary to what one might imagine, this effect isn't just a psychological curiosity. It shapes our relationships, our choices, and even the collective destiny of humanity. Because when trust is born not from knowledge but from ignorance, it becomes a dangerous power, capable of influencing multitudes. And this is where science meets philosophy, in the question that never leaves us: is ignorance more seductive than wisdom? Long before modern psychology gave the Dunning-Kruger effect its name, philosophers had already sensed this strange dance between ignorance and certainty. Science needed statistics, experiments, and graphs. The ancients needed only careful observation of life. Socrates in Athens made ignorance his banner. His famous phrase, "I only know that I know nothing," it wasn't a gesture of empty humility, but a profound philosophical blow. While everyone else sought to appear knowledgeable, Socrates exposed his own ignorance as a starting point. He intuited something that psychology would confirm 2 millennia later. Recognizing one's own limits is the first step to any real wisdom. Centuries later, Michel de Montaigne would repeat this gesture in his essays. For him, doubt was not an obstacle but a path. Montaigne laughed at the pretensions of the intellectuals of his time who collected certainties like medals. For him, the human mind is too fragile to sustain absolute truths. What remains for us is the honesty of admitting our vulnerability in the face of the unknown. Nietzsche, in turn, went even further. He saw empty self-confidence as a symptom of cultural decadence. Those who never doubt themselves, who clad themselves in the armor of ready-made certainties, are precisely those who refuse to gaze into the abyss of existence. Nietzsche saw doubt, crisis, and intellectual suffering not as weakness, but as evidence of spiritual vitality. Only those who face the darkness of not knowing are capable of creating new values. Philosophy, then, shows us a paradox. Ignorance is comfortable because it gives the feeling of solid ground. Knowledge, on the contrary, destabilizes, opens cracks, and leaves us exposed to an infinity of unanswered questions. It's no coincidence that wisdom often sounds hesitant, while ignorance sounds secure. We live in a world that mistakes hesitation for weakness, and conviction for intelligence. A speaker who speaks without hesitation undoubtedly seems more convincing than a thinker who hesitates between commas. However, as Socrates, Montaigne, and Nietzsche warn us, hesitation is not a sign of weakness but of depth. It is the mark of someone who sees the world in nuances, not slogans. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard said that doubt is as essential to faith as oxygen is to fire. And perhaps we can expand this metaphor to all human knowledge. Without doubt, no flame can survive. When viewed through the prism of philosophy, the Dunning-Kruger effect ceases to be just a scientific anecdote about people who believe too much in themselves. It becomes an uncomfortable mirror, forcing us to ask, don't we carry the same tendency within us? Because ignorance isn't just a state of being for those who haven't studied. It's also a daily temptation, offering us the sweet illusion of believing we already know enough. It's a refuge from the discomfort of complexity. It's the lazy antidote to the pain of thinking. And here is the paradox that philosophy never tires of showing us. The ignorant can sleep peacefully, convinced of their wisdom. The wise man, on the other hand, carries the weight of questions that will never have answers. And it is in this weight that, paradoxically, true freedom resides. We live in an age where opinion has become a commodity. It's never been easier to speak, never been harder to be heard. The internet, with its promise of democratizing knowledge, has also ended up democratizing the illusion of knowledge. Today, anyone with access to a smartphone can present themselves as an expert in politics, psychology, science, or philosophy. A few seconds of conviction in front of a camera is all it takes for thousands of people to accept their words as truth. It is in this fertile ground that the Dunning-Kruger effect flourishes like never before. What was once limited to bar conversations or small social circles is now amplified to millions, with likes, shares, and followers transforming ignorance into authority. Zygmunt Bauman would call this a reflection of liquid modernity. Nothing is solid, everything flows too quickly. Even knowledge. Today we consume ideas like fast food, quick, easy, cheap but incapable of truly nourishing. Wisdom is lost amidst catchphrases. Byung-Chul Han, another contemporary thinker, speaks of transparency society, where everyone needs to expose themselves, express their opinion, and show they have something to say. But in this excessive exposure, depth dissolves. The logic is no longer I think, therefore I am, but I post, therefore I am. The most disturbing thing is that superficial conviction has become social currency. Someone who hesitates, who shows doubt, rarely gains attention. However, someone who speaks firmly, even if they make egregious mistakes, seems more trustworthy. Trust in this new market is worth more than truth. The result? A culture where confident ignorance overcomes wavering wisdom, where political leaders, public figures, and digital influencers build empires based not on profundity, but on slogans. The spectacle of certainty has become entertainment. And this doesn't just happen in the realm of grand narratives. It happens in everyday life. Think about social media. How many times have you come across someone who, without ever having studied a topic in depth, claims to be an expert in health, economics, philosophy, or psychology? This conviction isn't born from study, but from the need to belong, and from the digital rewards of algorithms. Because in the logic of platforms, it doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is whether it's engaging. This is the point at which the Dunning-Kruger effect ceases to be just a cognitive flaw and becomes a cultural problem. The system we've created doesn't just allow for the overestimation of the ignorant, it need. And in this scenario, true knowledge finds itself increasingly marginalized. The thinker who hesitates, who problematizes, who brings nuance, is often seen as weak, indecisive, even irrelevant. The space for dialogue is taken over by the spectacle of conviction. But there's a hidden cost to all this. Because when superficiality becomes the norm, the emptiness becomes unbearable. The more we drown in quick opinions, the more we feel the lack of meaning. The constant noise hides the essential silence. Perhaps this is why so many, even surrounded by information, still feel lost. The excessive certainty of others only further exposes our own doubts. Ultimately, this avalanche of shallow convictions reveals a collective fear, the fear of facing the emptiness of not knowing. If the Dunning-Kruger effect were just a scientific curiosity or an internet joke, we might not need to worry so much. But the consequences of this cognitive bias are profound, both for the individual and for society. On a personal level, it creates a painful paradox. The less capable often feel more confident, while the more conscientious live tormented by doubt. This creates a constant emotional imbalance. The ignorant sleep peacefully while the thoughtful lose sleep. You've probably experienced this. In a work meeting, someone speaks with absolute conviction about something you know is wrong, but hesitates to correct it because your own mind throws up obstacles. What if I'm wrong? What if I don't know how to explain it properly? The result is that the most confident voice prevails, not the most truthful. This dynamic generates frustration, isolation, and even feelings of inadequacy in the most conscientious. Many withdraw, convinced that their doubt is a flaw, when in fact it is the clearest sign of lucidity. On a collective level, the consequences are even more devastating. Populist political leaders, spiritual gurus, digital influencers, all can exploit this human bias. By speaking with absolute conviction, even when their ideas are simplistic or misguided, they win hearts and minds hungry for certainty. Carl Jung warned us about the danger of collective shadow. What we individually repress finds its expression in the social unconscious. Repressed ignorance, the childish need for certainty, ends up projected onto leaders who embody precisely this figure of the confident, all-knowing man. And the more the masses identify with him, the more blind they become to their own shadow. This dynamic not only shapes elections and social movements, but also creates a culture in which the deep thinking is marginalized. Instead of celebrating the philosopher, we celebrate the orator. Instead of seeking nuances, we seek slogans. The danger is that societies led by confident ignoramuses tend to make disastrous decisions. History is replete with examples. Wars started by leaders blinded by conviction, economic collapses caused by those who believe themselves infallible, persecutions fueled by the illusion of absolute certainty. Emotionally, this also corrodes our relationships. How often do friendships, families, and marriages wear thin because one person insists on speaking as if they know everything, while the other, more aware, prefers the silence of doubt? The pride of ignorance kills listening, and without listening, dialogue is impossible. This is where we realize that the Dunning-Kruger effect is not just a quirk of the human mind, but one of the greatest obstacles to the evolution of consciousness. It shows us that ignorance is not simply the absence of knowledge, but the active presence of mistaken conviction. And that this conviction, when it gains power, becomes destructive. But perhaps the most profound lesson is this. The real danger lies not only in the ignorance of others, but in our own tendency to believe we already know enough. Because, to a greater or lesser extent, we all carry this bias within us. And recognizing this is the first step to not being dominated by it. We then return to the question that opened this reflection. Why do fools seem so confident, while wise men hesitate over every word? Psychology gave us a name, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Philosophy has given us a metaphor. Socrates, Montaigne, Nietzsche, and so many others have shown that doubt is the fertile soil of wisdom. Modern culture has given us the stage. Social media, politics, entertainment, all celebrating shallow convictions as if they were absolute truths. But deep down, this question has never had a simple answer, because it forces us to look at ourselves. It's not just others who fall prey to this effect, we do too. Every time we believe we know more than we do, every time we confuse opinion with understanding, every time we seek certainty to escape the weight of doubt, Dunning-Kruger lives within us. And this is where the human paradox arises. The ignorant can live peacefully in their bubble of convictions. The wise man carries the weight of uncertainty, but also the freedom that arises from it. Because, in the end, wisdom is not an accumulation of certainties, but the courage to remain on the shaky ground of not knowing. It is accepting that our convictions are fragile, that our truths are partial, that the mystery of life always eludes us. Nietzsche said that one must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Perhaps the chaos of doubts, hesitations, and unanswered questions is precisely what keeps the flame of consciousness alive. And perhaps the greatest act of wisdom is not to speak with conviction, but to listen in silence. It is not to defend absolute truths, but to walk humbly in uncertainty. Ultimately, the modern world will continue to reward the confident, the assertive, and those who peddle quick certainties. But it's up to us to decide whether we want to live in the comfortable illusion of ignorance or the fertile discomfort of doubt. The answer, as always, isn't in a definitive sentence. It's in the way we choose to live. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest wisdom is this: recognize one's own limits, and walk with the humility of someone who knows they will never know enough. If this video touched you in any way, if it made you pause for a moment, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This simple gesture helps bring this message to more people and allows me to continue producing more content like this, so that together we can explore the contradictions that make us human.